I, 28F, just found out my fiance, 30M, of 3 years has been secretly following, liking, and DMing a woman on a hidden Instagram account, and when I confronted him about it, he broke down crying, claiming that she's my half-sister I never knew existed, and he was just trying to make sure she was good enough before telling me about my estranged father's other family. Now my entire world feels like a house of cards built on quicksand, and I don't know if I'm being manipulated, blind, or completely irrational for wanting to call off our wedding that's in 2 months. Ida for thinking there's more to this story than he's telling me? For context, James, 30M, and I have been together for a little over 3 years, engaged for 8 months, with our wedding planned for this summer. We met at a charity fundraiser in the city where we both live, hit it off immediately, and have had what I always considered to be a rock-solid relationship. He's charming, attentive, successful as a financial advisor, and has always seemed completely transparent with me. He knows all about my complicated family history, namely that my father walked out when I was 7 to start a new family, and I haven't spoken to him since I was 15 when I told him I was done trying. James has been nothing but supportive about my decision to keep that door firmly closed. Or so I thought. Last week, I was using James's laptop to order flowers for his mother's birthday with his permission, when an Instagram notification popped up in the corner. This wouldn't be weird except the account wasn't his regular one that I follow, it was under the username J_Walker_92 which is a play on his last name. Curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked it. What I found made my stomach drop. This account followed exactly one person, a woman named Chloe Henderson. Her profile wasn't private, so I could see that James's account had liked almost all of her posts going back nearly 2 years. I also saw evidence of DM exchanges. Before I could check those, I heard James coming up the stairs, and I quickly closed the browser tab. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what possible innocent explanation there could be. The next morning, while James was in the shower, I looked up Chloe Henderson on my own phone. What I found made my hands shake. In her bio was her full name, Chloe Henderson Campbell. Campbell is my father's last name. I scrolled through her posts and found family photos including a man who was undeniably my father, just older and grayer than I remembered him. In one caption, she mentioned her awesome dad Robert and mom Diane. Robert Campbell. My father. There were other people in some of the photos who I assumed were my other half-siblings. When James came out of the bathroom, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone. I turned it around to show him Chloe's profile and asked, "Who is she, James? And why do you have a secret account to follow her?" His face went white. He sat down heavily beside me and started explaining. According to him, about a year into our relationship, he'd been at a client meeting when he overheard someone mention Robert Campbell. Being curious, he'd struck up a conversation and realized this person knew my father. Through this connection, he eventually learned about my father's other children, including Chloe. "I was just trying to protect you," he said, his voice cracking. "I know how much pain your father caused you. I wanted to make sure these people were good enough to potentially be in your life before I ever mentioned them. I was going to tell you after the wedding. I thought it would be a gift, a way to maybe heal that part of your past." "By lying to me for 2 years?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "By secretly contacting my half-sister behind my back?" "We've only exchanged a few messages," he insisted. "I was just feeling her out, seeing what kind of person she is. She doesn't know about you. I never mentioned your name. I just said I was interested in connecting with Robert's family." Something about his explanation didn't sit right with me. If his intentions were pure, why keep it secret for so long? Why make a fake account? Why not just tell me what he discovered? "Let me see the messages," I said. He hesitated, then said, "I deleted the account last month. I realized it was wrong to go behind your back. But the notification I'd seen was recent." I pointed this out, and he fumbled, saying he must have forgotten to delete it completely, that he hadn't actually used it in weeks. I wanted to believe him. Part of me still does. James has never given me reason to doubt him before, and the idea that he would maintain some elaborate deception for years seems far-fetched. But another part of me can't shake the feeling that there's something else going on. I called my best friend Alex, 27F, later that day and told her everything. She was immediately suspicious. "That's some stalker-level stuff, Eliza," she said. "Even with good intentions, normal people don't create fake accounts and spend 2 years following someone without telling their partner." She asked if I checked his phone records or credit card statements for any evidence he'd actually met this woman in person. I hadn't, and the thought made me feel dirty, like I was becoming the kind of untrusting partner I never wanted to be. That night, James tried to act like everything was normal. He made my favorite dinner and suggested we watch a movie. But there was a new tension between us that neither of us acknowledged. When he reached for my hand during the movie, I found myself wondering if he'd ever messaged Chloe while sitting beside me just like this. If he'd studied my reaction when I talked about my father, all while hiding his connection to my half-siblings. The next day, I did something I'm not proud of. While James was at the gym, I checked our shared credit card statements going back 6 months. There were several charges at a cafe across town that I didn't recognize, always on Tuesday afternoons when James said he had client meetings. The most recent was just last week. When he got home, I asked casually how his Tuesday client meetings had been going. Without hesitation, he launched into a story about a difficult client who was unsure about some investment strategy. The lie rolled off his tongue so easily that I felt a chill run down my spine. "That's funny," I said, "because according to our credit card, you've been at Westside Cafe those afternoons." His expression changed so quickly it was almost comical. "I can explain," he started, but for the first time in our relationship, I didn't want to hear it. "Have you been meeting with Chloe?" I asked directly. After a long pause, he nodded. "A few times. Just to talk about your father, to understand more about him. Do you honestly expect me to believe that you've been meeting my half-sister in secret for months, just to get to know my estranged father better? The man I've made it abundantly clear I want nothing to do with?" "It started that way," he said, his voice barely audible. "But then, I started to think maybe you should know them. Your half-siblings. They're good people, Eliza. Chloe is sweet and funny, and she reminds me of you sometimes. I thought maybe if you met them, it could help heal some of those old wounds." "That wasn't your decision to make," I said, my voice shaking. "You've been lying to me for almost our entire relationship. About something this important." "I wasn't lying," he insisted. "I was waiting for the right time." "And when exactly was that going to be?" After we were legally bound to each other? Were you planning to spring my long-lost family on me as some kind of sick wedding surprise? He looked hurt. It wasn't like that. I was protecting you. No, I said, the realization dawning on me as I spoke the words. You were controlling me. Making decisions about my family that weren't yours to make. Playing God with my life. James spent the night on the couch. I barely slept, alternating between rage and a deep, gnawing sadness. The next morning, I called out of work and sat down with my laptop. I found Chloe on LinkedIn and, after an hour of internal debate, sent her a connection request with a brief message explaining who I was. She responded almost immediately, asking if we could talk. We arranged to meet that afternoon at a park near my office. I told James the first was working late. Seeing Chloe in person was surreal. She has our father's eyes and my grandmother's chin. She's 2 years younger than me, tall and athletic looking, with a warm smile that immediately made me both like her and resent her at the same time. I've known about you forever, she said after we'd settled on a bench. Dad kept pictures of you in his office. He tried to reach out when you turned 18, and again when you graduated college, but never heard back. I felt a twinge of something, not quite regret, but awareness of a door I deliberately kept shut. My mother always forwarded his letters. I just never responded. She nodded, understanding. And James? How does he fit into all this? I explained how we met, our relationship, the wedding plans. Her expression grew increasingly troubled. Eliza, she said gently. James didn't meet you by accident. My blood ran cold. What do you mean? He approached me about a year and a half ago, saying he worked with Dad and had heard about his estranged daughter. He asked questions about you, about our family. A few months later, he mentioned he'd met you and you were dating. I thought it was a weird coincidence, but he swore he hadn't known who you were when you first met. My mind was racing, trying to piece together a timeline that made sense. But we met 3 years ago. You're saying he approached you a year and a half ago? She shook her head. No, the first time was maybe 2.5 years ago? Before Dad's heart surgery. James brought him a fruit basket at the hospital. Said he was from the financial firm. 2.5 years ago. 6 months into our relationship. James had told me he discovered my connection to Chloe a year in. Another lie. Did my father send him? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. No, nothing like that. Dad was as surprised as anyone when James showed up. We figured he was just being kind to a client. She paused. Though Dad did mention that James asked a lot of questions about the family. Especially about you. I felt sick. So James sought out my father, then me, then you. All while pretending it was coincidence? Chloe reached over and squeezed my hand. I don't know what his game is, but something doesn't add up. When I got home that evening, James was waiting with takeout from my favorite Thai place and an anxious expression. I couldn't even look at him. I mumbled something about a headache and locked myself in our spare bedroom, texting Alex everything I'd learned. You need to find out why, she texted back. What does he gain from all this deception? That's the question that's been haunting me. What possible motive could James have for orchestrating this elaborate scheme? Is he somehow using me to get to my father? Or using my father to get to me? Is there something about my family I don't know? The wedding is in 2 months. All the deposits are paid, invitations sent. My dress hangs in my mother's closet. And I'm sitting here wondering if my entire relationship has been built on lies. If the man I thought I knew has been playing some long con I can't even begin to understand. So Reddit, am I the asshole for thinking about calling off the wedding based on this? Am I overreacting? Is there an innocent explanation I'm missing? Because right now, I feel like I'm living in a bizarre psychological thriller, and I don't know what's real anymore. First update. Wow. I never expected this post to blow up the way it did. Thank you all for the comments, advice, and support. So many of you said I wasn't overreacting and encouraged me to dig deeper. You were right. Things have gotten so much more complicated, and I've discovered that this rabbit hole goes far deeper than I initially thought. After my last post, I decided I needed answers. Real ones, not the half-truths James had been feeding me. The morning after I met with Chloe, I woke up early and made coffee. James came into the kitchen looking like he hadn't slept at all. He tried to hug me, but I stepped away. We need to talk, I said, keeping my voice as neutral as possible. I met with Chloe yesterday. The color drained from his face. You what? I reached out to her. We met. We talked. I watched his reaction carefully. She told me you approached her family 2.5 years ago. 6 months after we started dating. James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I once found endearing but now recognized as his tell when he's stalling. It's complicated, Eliza. Then uncomplicated for me. Tell me the truth, all of it, right now. Or I'm walking out that door, and I won't be coming back. He sank into a chair at our kitchen table. You have to understand, my intentions were good. Start from the beginning, I said, sitting across from him. How did you really find out about my father? According to James, he had indeed met me by chance at a charity event. But early in our relationship, when I mentioned my estranged father Robert Campbell, something clicked for him. He recognized the name from his firm's client list. Not my father directly, but one of his companies. I looked into it out of curiosity, James claimed. I wasn't even sure it was the same Robert Campbell until I saw a photo in the company profile that matched the one you showed me from your childhood. He said he became fascinated by the coincidence, and started digging further. He found out about my father's successful business ventures, his new family, and his considerable wealth. When he realized how much my father was worth, he admitted, he saw an opportunity. Not for money, he quickly added, seeing my expression. For you. I thought if I could somehow broker a reconciliation between you two, it might heal that wound you've carried all these years. So you approached his family under false pretenses? I just wanted to understand the situation better before I brought it up to you. I needed to know what kind of man your father had become, whether he deserved a second chance with you. And the secret Instagram account? I pressed. I created it to follow Chloe without raising suspicions. I was afraid if I used my real account and she looked into me, she might discover my connection to you before I was ready to explain everything. Each answer seemed rehearsed, too smooth. And each one raised more questions. Why keep it secret for so long? Why not tell me once you confirmed it was my father? Honestly? At first, I was afraid you'd be angry that I'd gone behind your back. Then, as I learned more about them, I became convinced that reconnecting with your father would be good for you. But I knew how stubborn you could be. He reached for my hand across the table. I pulled mine away. I wanted to make sure the ground was prepared, that when I finally told you, I could also tell you they wanted to know you too. So all those Tuesday afternoon client meetings were actually you meeting with Chloe? He nodded. And sometimes your other half-siblings. There are 2 others, Thomas, 27M, and Zoe, 23F. They're all good people, Eliza. They want to know you. And my father? Have you been meeting with him too? James hesitated, then nodded. A few times. He's changed, Eliza. The man who abandoned you, he regrets it deeply. I felt a surge of anger so intense my hands shook. You had no right, I said quietly. No right to make these decisions for me, to orchestrate this whole thing like I'm some child who doesn't know what's best for herself. I was trying to help, he insisted. By lying? By manipulating me? By going behind my back for years? I was shouting now, unable to contain my fury. Do you have any idea how violating this feels? To know that my fiancé, the person I trusted most in this world, has been secretly meeting with a family that broke me? Eliza, please. No. I'm done listening to your excuses. I stood up. I'm going to stay with Alex for a few days. I need time to think. I packed a bag while James hovered anxiously in the doorway, alternating between apologies and pleas for understanding. As I was zipping up my suitcase, a notification popped up on his phone, which was lying on the dresser. I couldn't see the details, but the preview showed a message from RC. Robert Campbell, I presumed? Still keeping secrets? I asked, nodding toward his phone. James grabbed it quickly. It's not what you think. It never is with you, is it? I left without another word. Alex welcomed me with open arms, a bottle of wine, and her trademark brutal honesty. So he's been playing puppet master with your entire life for almost 3 years, she summarized after I told her everything. The question is why? What does he get out of it? That's what I couldn't figure out. James isn't hurting for money. His career is solid, he has his own wealth. Even if he was after my father's money somehow, why go through me? Why not just approach him directly as a financial advisor? The next day, I called in sick to work and did something I've been avoiding for 13 years. I looked up my father. Robert Campbell, CEO of Campbell Innovations, a surprisingly successful tech company specializing in healthcare software. According to the business articles I found, my father's net worth was estimated at over $50 million. I sat staring at that number for a long time. I knew he'd done well for himself, but I had no idea it was to that extent. Was this what James was after? A connection to my father's wealth? It seemed both too obvious and not satisfying as an explanation. James came from money himself, and while he wasn't worth millions, he wasn't hurting financially. That afternoon, I received a text from Chloe asking if I was okay. I hesitated, then called her. I told Dad, she said immediately. About meeting you. He cried, Eliza. He wants to see you. The request hit me like a physical blow. I can't think about that right now, I said. I'm trying to figure out what's going on with James. There was a pause on the line. There's something else you should know, Chloe said cautiously. James has been asking a lot of questions about Dad's will. About his succession plans for the company. A cold feeling spread through my chest. What exactly did he want to know? Whether Dad had made provisions for you. Whether you were included as an heir despite the estrangement. She hesitated. Dad thought James was asking on your behalf, trying to look out for your interests. And am I? Included, I mean. Yes. Dad always hoped you'd come around eventually. He set up a trust for you years ago. It's substantial, Eliza. And you get a share of the company too, if you want it. My head was spinning. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm worried about James's intentions. At first, I thought he genuinely cared about reconnecting our family. Now I'm not so sure. The timing of his interest in you, right after learning about Dad's company. I thanked her and hung up, my mind racing. Could that really be it? Had James targeted me specifically because of my connection to my father's wealth? Orchestrated our chance meeting at the charity event? The thought made me physically ill. I needed more evidence before I confronted him again. That evening, Alex helped me come up with a plan. James had been texting me constantly, begging me to come home so we could talk. I finally replied, saying I needed more time but asking if he could send me the information for our honeymoon flight so I could request the time off work. It was a plausible request. We'd booked the tickets months ago but hadn't discussed the details recently. James texted back the confirmation immediately, clearly eager to cooperate with any request that might get him back in my good graces. With the confirmation number, I was able to log into the airline site and access the reservation. What I found confirmed my worst suspicions. Our 2-week honeymoon in Bali included a 3-day stopover in Singapore. And according to his text history with my father, which Chloe had asked Thomas to access from their dad's iPad, unethical, yes, but I was past caring about that. James had arranged for us to have dinner with my father during that stopover. A surprise reconciliation he'd been planning for months, all without my knowledge or consent. The final piece clicked into place when Alex, who works in HR, did some digging into James's employment history. It turns out that 2 years ago, just as our relationship was getting serious, James had left his previous firm to join his current one. The move seemed lateral at the time, but his new firm happened to have significant business ties to Campbell Innovations. In fact, they managed several investment portfolios for my father's company executives. It was all connected. James had deliberately positioned himself closer to my father's business interests while simultaneously working his way into my life. The question was no longer whether he had an ulterior motive, but just how elaborate his scheme really was. I spent that night drafting an email to the wedding venue, caterers, and other vendors, explaining that the wedding would need to be postponed indefinitely. I couldn't bring myself to say cancelled yet, though that's what my heart was telling me. I still needed to understand the full scope of James's deception before I made my final decision. The next morning, I received a text from an unknown number. It was Thomas, my half-brother. Chloe told me what's going on, he wrote. I think there's something you should know about James and Dad. Can we meet? I agreed, suggesting a coffee shop near Alex's apartment. Thomas turned out to be tall and lanky, with our father's build but a gentleness in his manner that immediately put me at ease. After awkward introductions and small talk, he got to the point. James approached Dad with a business proposal about a year ago, he explained. A partnership between his firm and Campbell Innovations. Dad was interested but cautious. Then James played his trump card. You. What do you mean? He essentially implied that if Dad didn't agree to the partnership, he'd make sure you never reconciled with the family. He positioned himself as a gatekeeper to you, Eliza. He used you as leverage. I felt the blood drain from my face. That doesn't make sense. The reconciliation was supposedly for my benefit, so why would he threaten to prevent it? Thomas looked uncomfortable. Because Dad's health isn't great. The heart surgery 2 years ago was just the beginning. He has a condition that's progressively getting worse. He's been getting his affairs in order, making peace with his past mistakes. He paused. Including setting up trusts for all his children. Your share is contingent on you reconnecting with the family before. He trailed off. Before he dies, I finished for him. Thomas nodded solemnly. James knows this. Somehow, he found out the details of the will. I think his plan was to orchestrate a reconciliation, make sure you qualified for your inheritance, and then benefit as my husband, I concluded, the pieces falling sickeningly into place. That evening, I returned to our apartment while James was at work. I needed to gather some more of my things and, if I'm being honest, to look for more evidence. In his home office, I found a folder labeled Campbell Project hidden behind some tax documents. Inside were detailed notes on my father's business, copies of what appeared to be internal Campbell Innovations documents, and, most disturbingly, a relationship timeline for me and James that included milestones yet to come. Baby announcement, year 2 was circled in red. He'd planned it all. Our entire relationship, our future, all mapped out like a business strategy. And I'd been nothing but a means to an end, a way to access my father's wealth and business connections. When I heard his key in the lock, I slipped the folder into my bag and prepared to confront him with what I knew. But seeing his face, the face I'd loved and trusted for 3 years, I realized I wasn't ready for that conversation. Not yet. I needed to be strategic, to understand the full scope of his plan before I showed my hand. So instead, I put on the performance of my life. I told him I'd had time to think, that while I was still hurt by his deception, I could see he had good intentions. I said I was willing to work through it. That maybe meeting my father wasn't such a bad idea after all. The relief and joy on his face would have been touching if I hadn't known it was all about the success of his scheme, not about us. He held me tight, promised to be completely honest from now on, swore his only motivation had been to help heal my family wounds. I smiled and nodded and died a little inside with every lie that passed between us. When he kissed me, I kissed him back and tried not to think about the elaborate betrayal I was only just beginning to uncover. I'm back at Alex's place now, going through the folder. There's so much here, evidence of a deception so complete it makes me question every moment of our relationship. Was any of it real? Did he ever love me at all, or was I just a stepping stone to wealth and connections? I don't know what I'm going to do next. Part of me wants to confront him immediately, to watch his face as his carefully constructed house of cards collapses. But another part, a colder, more calculating part I didn't know I possessed, wants to turn the tables on him. To beat him at his own game. So that's where I stand, Reddit. The wedding is indefinitely postponed while I figure out my next steps. I'm in contact with the half-siblings I never knew I wanted, circling warily around the idea of meeting the father I thought I'd written off forever. And I'm engaged to a man who has orchestrated the most elaborate con I could imagine, all while convincing me he was the love of my life. Am I the asshole for pretending everything is fine while I plan my own countermove? For collecting evidence against the man who promised to love and cherish me till death do us part? Because right now, revenge feels a lot more satisfying than heartbreak. Second update. Thank you all for the overwhelming support and advice on my last post. Reading your comments gave me strength during what has been the most bizarre few weeks of my life. Many of you encouraged me to play the long game rather than confront James immediately, and that's exactly what I've been doing. The situation has evolved in ways I never could have predicted, and I'm still processing everything that's happened. After my last update, I decided to continue the charade with James while gathering more evidence. I moved back into our apartment, slept beside him at night, and pretended everything was returning to normal. Every smile, every kiss, every casual conversation felt like a betrayal of myself, but I kept reminding myself of the folder I'd found, of the calculated way he'd mapped out our entire future. The hardest part was pretending to be excited about wedding planning again. We had discussions about whether to keep our original date or push it back, and I found myself suggesting we stick with the original timeline since we've worked through this rough patch. Each time I said something like that, James would look at me with such apparent adoration that for brief, disorienting moments, I would doubt my conclusions. Could I be wrong about him? Could there be some explanation I hadn't considered? Then I would remember the folder, the timeline, the way he'd systematically lied to me for years, and my resolve would harden again. Meanwhile, I was building relationships with my half-siblings. Thomas, Chloe, and I met for lunch several times, carefully scheduling it during James's work hours. Zoe joined us once via video call from her college campus across the country. They were understandably cautious with me at first, not sure if I was gathering intelligence for James or genuinely interested in knowing them. But as we spent more time together, real connections began to form. He always kept your school photos on his desk, Thomas told me during one of our meetups. Every year, even after you stopped seeing him, he'd hire a private investigator to get a current photo. Mom hated it, thought it was unhealthy, but he couldn't let go. He cried at your college graduation, Chloe added. He watched from the back, made sure you didn't see him. These revelations about my father were disorienting. The man they described, loving, regretful, desperate for connection, bore little resemblance to the father who had walked out on my mother and me, who had started a new family as if we were replaceable. I wasn't ready to reconcile these contrasting images yet, wasn't ready to let go of the anger I'd carried for so long. But I was curious. So when Thomas suggested that I meet with our father, just once, to hear his side of the story, I hesitantly agreed. We arranged to meet at a restaurant halfway between our cities, on a day when James believed I was at a wedding dress fitting with Alex. Seeing my father after 13 years was surreal. He looked older, of course, gray-haired and thinner than I remembered, with lines etched deeply around his eyes and mouth. When he saw me, he froze, one hand clutching the back of a chair as if for support. Eliza, he said, his voice breaking on my name. You came. I didn't hug him, couldn't bring myself to cross that threshold yet. But I sat across from him and listened as he spoke. He talked about his regrets, about how leaving had been the biggest mistake of his life. He explained that he'd been young and selfish, trapped in a marriage that had become a battlefield, convinced that a clean break would be better than subjecting me to years of conflict. I was wrong, he said simply. I hurt you, and your mother, in ways I can never fully repair. All I can do now is tell you how sorry I am and hope that someday you might find it in your heart to forgive me. I didn't cry. I thought I might, but my emotions were too complex, too tangled to resolve into simple tears. Instead, I asked questions. Hard ones. About why he'd stopped fighting for visitation when I was 10. About why he'd started a new family so quickly. About why, if he regretted his choices so deeply, he had respected my decision to cut contact when I was 15. His answers weren't perfect, weren't always what I wanted to hear, but they were honest. And when he described receiving my letter as a teenager, the one where I told him to stop trying, that I was done, I saw genuine pain in his eyes. I thought I was respecting your wishes, he said. But perhaps I was just being a coward again, taking the easier path. I didn't forgive him that day. I'm not sure I ever will, completely. But I did agree to keep communication open, to get to know him and the rest of his family better. As we were saying our awkward goodbyes, he brought up James. He seems very invested in our reconciliation, my father said carefully. Almost unusually so. I nodded, choosing my words with care. I've been wondering about that myself. My father hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. This is my attorney, Vanessa Winters. She's been looking into James's background. There are some irregularities she's found. Things you should probably know. I took the card, my fingers trembling slightly. What kind of irregularities? Financial ones, mostly. And it seems this isn't the first time he's insinuated himself into a wealthy family. He must have seen something in my expression because he quickly added, I'm not trying to interfere in your relationship, Eliza. But given the circumstances of how he approached our family, I thought you should have all the facts. I slipped the card into my purse, unsure whether to feel grateful or manipulated. Was my father genuinely looking out for me, or was this some power play in a game I didn't fully understand? I thanked him stiffly and left, my mind reeling with new questions. I called Vanessa Winters the next day from a conference room at work. She was brisk and professional, laying out what she discovered without emotional commentary. According to her investigation, James had been briefly engaged once before, to the daughter of a wealthy industrialist in Boston. That relationship had ended abruptly just 2 months before he moved to my city and, coincidentally, just after the woman's father had discovered financial irregularities in accounts James had been advising on. There was no formal accusation of wrongdoing, Vanessa explained. The family wanted to avoid scandal. But Mr. Walker left his position at the firm immediately afterward, with no explanation provided to colleagues or clients. She also found evidence that James had been quietly accumulating debt over the past few years, not enormous sums, but significant enough to raise eyebrows given his salary. Credit cards, an underwater investment property, a personal loan with an unusually high interest rate. He's living beyond his means, she concluded. And based on the timing of these debts, they began shortly after he became involved with you. I thanked her for the information and sat in that sterile conference room for nearly an hour afterward, trying to process what I'd learned. James, my James, the man who had held me through panic attacks and food poisoning, who knew how I took my coffee and which songs made me cry, was a fraud. A calculating con artist who had seen me as nothing more than access to wealth. That evening, I met Chloe for dinner. I needed to talk to someone who understood the situation but wasn't as emotionally invested as Alex. Over pasta and too much wine, I told her everything I'd learned. I suspected something wasn't right, she said, shaking her head. The way he would slip questions about Dad's business into casual conversation. How eager he was to tell us about your career successes, like he was selling you to us. I just can't believe I fell for it, I said, pushing my food around my plate. 3 years. 3 years of my life with someone who saw me as a meal ticket. Chloe reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Don't beat yourself up. He's clearly done this before. He's good at it. What am I supposed to do now? I asked, feeling more lost than I wanted to admit. I can't just confront him, he'll deny everything. And even if I had concrete proof, what would that accomplish? The relationship is over either way. Maybe it's not about what you can prove, Chloe suggested. Maybe it's about making sure he can't do this to anyone else. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay beside James, listening to his even breathing, thinking about Chloe's words. Making sure he can't do this to anyone else. The idea took root in my mind, growing and evolving as the hours passed. By morning, I had the beginnings of a plan. Over the next week, I became the perfect fiancé. I threw myself back into wedding planning with enthusiasm that fooled even Alex, who knew the truth. I suggested we move the ceremony up by 2 weeks because I just can't wait to be your wife. James was thrilled, interpreting my eagerness as a sign that his plan was working. Meanwhile, I was methodically building my case. With Vanessa Winters' help, I obtained copies of James's financial records, evidence of his previous engagement, and documentation of the suspicious activity at his former firm. Thomas, who works in IT, helped me recover deleted messages from my father's devices, conversations with James that clearly showed his manipulation and implied threats about access to me. I also did something I never thought I would do. I agreed to my father's suggestion of a pre-wedding family dinner, with both my mother and his current family. James was ecstatic when I told him, believing his surprise reconciliation plan was now unnecessary. I'm so proud of you, he said, kissing my forehead. This will be good for everyone. The dinner was scheduled for the weekend before the wedding. My mother, remarkably, agreed to attend after I explained that I was trying to make peace with the past. She'd moved on years ago, remarried to a kind man who treated her well, but I knew seeing my father would still be difficult for her. As the date approached, I found myself experiencing unexpected emotions. Despite knowing what James really was, part of me still loved the person I thought he had been. I would catch myself laughing at his jokes or leaning into his touch, then feel disgusted with myself afterward. It was like greeting someone who was still physically present but fundamentally changed in my perception. The night before the dinner, I almost broke. The weight of the deception, both his and now mine, felt crushing. I locked myself in the bathroom and called Alex, sobbing quietly into the phone. I don't know if I can go through with this, I whispered. It's too much. You can do this, she assured me. One more day of pretending, and then you never have to see him again if you don't want to. Think of it as the final scene in a very bad play. I nodded, though she couldn't see me, and splashed cold water on my face. When I emerged, James was waiting with a glass of wine and a concerned expression. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Just wedding jitters," I lied, accepting the wine. "And a little nervous about tomorrow. It's a lot, having everyone together for the first time." "It'll be perfect," he promised, pulling me close. "Trust me." If only he knew. The restaurant my father selected for our dinner was upscale but private, with a separate room for our party. I arrived early with James, my stomach in knots. My father and his family were already there, him, his wife Diane, Chloe, Thomas, and Zoe, who had flown in specifically for this event. They greeted me warmly and James with a cordiality that only I could recognize as forced. My mother and stepfather arrived next. There was a tense moment when she and my father first made eye contact, 13 years of unspoken history passing between them. But they both handled it with grace, shaking hands and making polite small talk as we were seated. The meal began smoothly enough. We ordered drinks, appetizers, made careful conversation about neutral topics. James was at his charming best, facilitating discussion, making sure everyone's glasses stayed full. Anyone watching would have thought he was simply an attentive fiancé helping to navigate a delicate family situation. About halfway through the main course, my father clinked his glass gently with his fork. The table fell silent. "I'd like to propose a toast," he said, raising his glass. "To Eliza and James, and new beginnings. Eliza, having you back in my life, even in this limited way, means more than I can express. I know I have years of mistakes to make up for, and I'm grateful for the chance to try." Murmurs of agreement circled the table. I felt tears prick at my eyes, surprised by the genuine emotion his words evoked. I raised my glass in acknowledgement, not trusting myself to speak. "Actually," James said, standing up with his own glass raised, "I'd like to say something too." He smiled down at me, then addressed the table. "Many of you don't know this, but I played a small role in bringing this family back together. When I learned about Robert's connection to Eliza early in our relationship, I felt called to help heal these old wounds." I watched his face as he spun his version of events, marveling at how sincere he sounded, how he positioned himself as the selfless hero of our story. He talked about wanting to give Eliza back her family as if they were a gift he could bestow. About how he carefully nurtured the conditions for reconciliation over the years. "So while we're celebrating new beginnings," he continued, "I'd also like to toast to the future. To family." He paused, his gaze sweeping meaningfully around the table. "And to the business opportunities that bringing families together can create." There it was. The mask slipping, just slightly. A flash of his true purpose, visible to anyone paying close attention. I saw my father's jaw tighten, saw Thomas and Chloe exchange glances. "Speaking of business opportunities," I said, standing up beside James, "I have something to share with everyone." James looked at me in surprise. This wasn't part of the script he'd imagined for tonight. James has been incredibly dedicated to bringing our families together, I said carefully. In fact, his dedication goes far beyond what any of you know. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder, not the original one I'd found in his office, but a new one I'd prepared, containing copies of all the evidence I'd gathered. I placed it on the table. "What's this?" James asked, his smile faltering slightly. "Evidence," I said simply. "Of how you've been planning this for years. How you identified me as Robert Campbell's daughter and orchestrated our chance meeting at that charity event. How you've been manipulating both me and my father for financial gain. How you did the same thing to another family in Boston before moving here." The color drained from James's face. "Eliza, what are you talking about? This is crazy." I opened the folder and began distributing documents around the table. Financial records showing his mounting debt. Screenshots of messages between him and my father, carefully edited to remove context that would reveal his true intentions. A copy of his previous firm's internal investigation into financial irregularities. "I found your Campbell Project folder," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I saw your timeline for our relationship. I know everything, James. How you approached Chloe and Thomas before telling me they existed. How you threatened to keep me away from my father if he didn't agree to your business proposal." James looked desperately around the table, meeting only cold stares. "These are misunderstandings," he insisted. "Taken out of context, they look bad, but I can explain everything." "Please do," my father said, his voice dangerously calm. "Explain how you used my daughter as leverage in a business negotiation." James's expression hardened as he realized the trap he'd walked into. "This is ridiculous. Eliza and I are getting married in a week. We love each other." He turned to me, reaching for my hand. "Tell them this is a misunderstanding, baby." I pulled my hand away. "The wedding's off, James. It has been since I found your folder. I've just been playing along until I could gather enough evidence to make sure you can't do this to anyone else." "Do what?" He snapped, anger finally breaking through his carefully constructed facade. "Try to help you? Try to give you back the family you lost? Everything I did was for you." "No," I said quietly. "Everything you did was for you. For your career, for access to my father's money, for whatever sick satisfaction you get from manipulating people who trust you." He laughed bitterly. "You have no proof of any of this. These are just papers and out-of-context messages. It's your word against mine." "Actually," Thomas spoke up, "we have a bit more than that." He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen a few times. James's voice filled the room. "I need that introduction to Weber." The recording played. "Campbell's being stubborn, but he'll come around when he realizes I control access to his precious daughter. She trusts me completely, she'll believe whatever I tell her about him." James's face contorted with fury. "You recorded me? That's illegal." "One-party consent state," Thomas replied calmly. "And I was definitely consenting." James turned back to me, his expression morphing into one of wounded innocence with practiced ease. "Eliza, please. Whatever you think you know, it's not the whole story. I love you. Everything else was just business. It doesn't change what we have." For a brief moment, looking into his eyes, the eyes I'd gazed into countless mornings, the eyes I trusted, I felt a flicker of doubt. What if there was some explanation? What if, underneath all the manipulation, he did love me? Then I remembered the timeline in his folder. Baby announcement, year 2 circled in red. Everything planned out, every milestone of our relationship calculated for maximum benefit to him. "What we had wasn't real," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "It was a long con, and I was just the mark." James's mask slipped completely then, his handsome face twisting into something ugly and unfamiliar. "You ungrateful bitch," he hissed. "You were nothing when I found you. A nobody with daddy issues and trust problems. I gave you a future. I gave you a family. And this is how you repay me?" The table fell silent, shocked by his venom. Even James seemed taken aback by his own outburst, immediately trying to backpedal. "I didn't mean that," he said quickly. "I'm just upset. This is all so unexpected. I think you should leave," my father said, standing up. "Now." James looked around the table one last time, perhaps hoping to find a sympathetic face. Finding none, he grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair. "This isn't over," he muttered as he brushed past me. After he left, the silence in the room was deafening. I sank back into my chair, suddenly exhausted, the adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation draining away. My mother was the first to speak. "I always thought he was too perfect," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "No one is that charming without effort." A small, choked laugh escaped me, tears finally spilling over. 3 years, I whispered. 3 years of my life with someone who never really existed. "Not wasted years," Chloe said gently. "Look what you gained." "Us." She gestured around the table at my newfound family. It was true. As painful as this betrayal had been, it had brought my half-siblings into my life. And, in some unexpected way, it had created space for me to begin healing my relationship with my father. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. We abandoned any pretense of a formal dinner, instead huddled together like survivors of a natural disaster, talking over one another, sharing stories, piecing together the full extent of James's deception. My father's lawyer joined us briefly, outlining the legal options available if James tried to retaliate in any way. When I finally returned to what had been our apartment, James thankfully nowhere to be found, I felt both hollowed out and strangely light. The truth had cost me my relationship, my future as I'd imagined it, but it had freed me from a life built on lies. The next few days were a whirlwind of practical matters, canceling wedding vendors, returning gifts, explaining to confused friends and relatives that the wedding was off. I moved out of our apartment while James was at work, taking only what was indisputably mine, leaving his key on the kitchen counter. He called and texted relentlessly at first, cycling through anger, pleading, and bargaining. I blocked his number after the third voicemail where he alternated between calling me a vindictive bitch and begging for another chance. When flowers arrived at my office, I donated them to a nearby hospital. It's been 2 weeks since that dinner. I'm staying with Alex temporarily while I look for a new place. My mother has been incredibly supportive, checking in daily without smothering me. And surprisingly, my father has respected my boundaries, reaching out only with practical offers of help, legal advice, recommendations for apartments in secure buildings, and introduction to a financial advisor he trusts to help me disentangle my finances from James's. Chloe, Thomas, and Zoe have become unexpected sources of comfort, each in their own way. Chloe sends me funny texts throughout the day, little moments of levity when darkness threatens to creep in. Thomas helped me sweep my devices for any spyware James might have installed. And Zoe, the youngest, sends me playlists with titles like Songs for When Your Ex is Actually a Sociopath. Yesterday, I received an email from James's former fiancée in Boston. Vanessa had reached out to her on my behalf, and she wanted me to know that I wasn't alone, that she'd experienced the same pattern of behavior. "He's like a virus that adapts to each host," she wrote. "He becomes whatever you need most, until he's gotten what he wants." Hearing from her was both heartbreaking and validating, confirmation that this wasn't my fault, that James is simply very, very good at what he does. I'm not okay yet. I still have moments where I miss the person I thought James was, where I question every memory, wondering which moments were genuine and which were calculated. I still find myself reaching for my phone to text him when something funny happens, before remembering that the person I want to share with never actually existed. But I'm getting there. Each day feels a little less raw than the one before. And I'm finding unexpected silver linings, reconnecting with my father after 13 years of silence. Discovering siblings I never knew I wanted. Learning that I'm stronger than I ever realized. So, Reddit, that's where things stand. My wedding is cancelled, my relationship was a lie, and I'm building a new life from the ashes of the old one. And strangely, despite everything, I don't regret exposing James. There's a certain power in facing the truth, however painful it might be. Am I the asshole for feeling more anger than heartbreak? For being almost clinically fascinated by the elaborate deception James constructed? For finding a certain satisfaction in having dismantled his plan so thoroughly? Because sometimes, in my darkest moments, I wonder if his manipulation changed me, made me colder, more calculating than I was before. Final update. It's been 6 months since my last post, and I want to thank everyone for the incredible support, advice, and even the tough love some of you shared. I've read every comment, and they've helped me process everything that happened. Many of you asked for an update, so here it is, the final chapter in what I now think of as the James saga. After the confrontation at the restaurant, things got worse before they got better. James didn't go quietly into the night as I'd hoped. Instead, he embarked on what I can only describe as a campaign of harassment and manipulation. He sent emails to mutual friends with his version of events, painting me as unstable and ungrateful. He ran into my colleagues at bars and coffee shops, sharing carefully edited stories that made him seem like the victim. He even reached out to my mother, trying to convince her that my father had manipulated me into ending our relationship as some sort of revenge plot. None of it worked. The people who truly knew me saw through his lies. And those who didn't? Well, they weren't people I needed in my life anyway. The turning point came about 2 months after our breakup, when James showed up at my new apartment, a secure building with a doorman, thanks to my father's recommendation. I still don't know how he found my address. The doorman, thankfully, refused to let him up, but James created such a scene in the lobby that the police were called. While they were questioning him, one of the officers recognized his name from an unrelated investigation. It turns out that the financial irregularities at his previous firm in Boston weren't as neatly buried as he'd thought. The officer made a call, and by the end of the day, James was being questioned about a series of suspicious transactions involving client funds. I'd like to say I felt vindicated when I heard the news, but mostly I felt tired. Tired of having James's shadow hanging over my life, tired of looking over my shoulder, tired of explaining to concerned friends that yes, I really was doing okay. That night, I called my father. Our relationship was still tentative at that point, weekly phone calls, occasional dinners with the whole family, careful conversations that avoided the most painful parts of our history. But something about James's arrest broke down a wall between us. I wish I could have protected you from this, my father said after I told him what happened. From him. It wasn't your job to protect me, I replied, surprising myself with the words. I'm an adult. I made my own choices. Still, he said, and I could hear the regret in his voice. If I'd been in your life, if I'd been the father you deserved, maybe you wouldn't have been so susceptible to someone like him. It was the first time he'd acknowledged so directly how his absence had shaped me, had created vulnerabilities that James had expertly exploited. Not making excuses for James, we were both clear that the blame lay squarely with him, but recognizing the context that had made his manipulation possible. Maybe, I conceded. Or maybe he would have found another way in. He was very good at what he did. We talked for hours that night, having the most honest conversation we'd had since reconnecting. I told him about growing up without him, about watching friends with their fathers and feeling the hollow space where mine should have been. He told me about the guilt that had eaten at him over the years, about how he convinced himself that staying away was better than being a part-time presence in my life. I got it wrong, he said simply. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right, if you'll let me. I didn't offer forgiveness that night, some wounds are too deep for quick healing, but I did offer something new, hope. Hope that we could build something meaningful from the wreckage of the past. Over the next few months, as James's legal troubles deepened, it turns out financial fraud leaves quite a paper trail when people know where to look. My relationship with my newfound family continued to evolve. Chloe and I discovered we share a love of the same obscure indie bands. Thomas taught me to rock climb, an activity I'd always been too afraid to try. Zoe consulted me on her graduate school applications, valuing my perspective as someone who'd been through the process. And Diane, my father's wife, a woman I'd resented in absence for decades, turned out to be warm, wise, and genuinely interested in knowing me. I never wanted to replace your mother, she told me during a surprisingly emotional lunch. I just hope that someday there might be room in your life for me too. My mother, remarkably, has handled all of this with grace. When I nervously told her I was developing relationships with my father's family, she squeezed my hand and said, "Honey, I've been waiting 20 years for you to heal that wound. I'm just glad you finally had the chance." The most unexpected development came 3 months ago, when I was offered a position at my father's company. Not out of nepotism, I interviewed rigorously, met with department heads, presented a portfolio of my work, but because my skills in marketing strategy genuinely aligned with what they needed. I hesitated before accepting, worried about how it would look to others, concerned about blurring the lines between our personal relationship and professional interactions. But ultimately, I decided that passing up an amazing opportunity out of fear of perception would be letting James's manipulation continue to control my choices. So now I work 3 floors down from my father, have lunch with Chloe, who runs their social media department, twice a week, and am learning the family business from the ground up. There are awkward moments, certainly, times when colleagues clearly wonder if I've been given special treatment, days when the emotional weight of working with family feels overwhelming. But there's also a sense of building something meaningful, of reclaiming a connection that was stolen from me years ago. As for James, his story ended with less drama than it began. He accepted a plea deal last month, significant financial penalties and probation rather than jail time. His professional licenses were revoked, and he's barred from working in financial services again. According to mutual acquaintances, he's moved across the country to start over somewhere his reputation hasn't preceded him. I haven't spoken to him since that night at the restaurant. The last contact I had was a letter that arrived about a month ago, full of the same manipulative tactics, apologies tangled with subtle blame, protestations of love interwoven with hints that I was somehow at fault. I burned it without finishing it, a symbolic act of closure that felt more powerful than I expected. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, wondering if any of it was real. If the man who held me when I cried, who knew exactly how to make me laugh on my worst days, was entirely a fiction. My therapist, yes, I finally started therapy, something many of you recommended in the comments, says it's normal to grieve the relationship I thought I had, even while acknowledging that it was built on lies. The feelings you had were real, she reminds me. The person you loved wasn't, but your capacity for love is genuine. Don't let him take that from you. It's advice I'm trying to take to heart as I cautiously begin dating again. Nothing serious yet, casual coffees, dinner with a colleague from another department, a setup from Chloe that was awkward but endearing. I'm more guarded now, yes, but I'm working hard not to let that guardedness calcify into permanent distrust. The one unexpected gift in all of this has been my relationship with my half-siblings. What started as an alliance against James has deepened into something I never knew I was missing. Last month, all of us, my mother and stepfather, my father and Diane, Chloe, Thomas, Zoe, and me, spent a weekend at a lake house together. It was awkward at times, emotional at others, but ultimately healing in ways I couldn't have imagined a year ago. There was a moment, sitting on the dock watching the sunset, when I realized that James had inadvertently given me the one thing he never intended to, a whole family. Not the perfect, airbrushed version he tried to manipulate into existence for his own gain, but a real one, complicated, sometimes messy, still healing from old hurts, but genuine. I don't know what the future holds. My father's health concerns are real, though not as immediately dire as James led me to believe. The trust he established for me exists, but I've asked that the funds be directed to a scholarship program for children from single-parent homes instead. I don't want or need his money. What I wanted, what I found, is so much more valuable: connection, understanding, the chance to rewrite a story I thought had ended when I was 7 years old. So that's where I am now, Reddit. Working a job I love, building relationships with family both old and new, slowly opening myself to the possibility of trust again. Some days are harder than others. Sometimes I still catch myself wondering if there were signs I missed, red flags I ignored. But most days, I'm simply grateful, for the truth, however painful it was, for the strength I found in facing it, and for the unexpected second chances that came from the ruins of deception. As for whether I'm the asshole, a question that started this whole thread, I've come to realize it doesn't much matter. James betrayed me, yes, but in exposing that betrayal, I found something valuable, myself. Not the person he tried to shape me into, not the abandoned daughter defined by old wounds, but someone stronger, more compassionate, and ultimately more whole than I was before. And maybe that's the real ending to this story, not that the villain was vanquished or that the heroine lived happily ever after, but that sometimes, the most valuable thing we can find in betrayal is the truth of who we really are.